Well, look at this. I have been welcomed into the fraternity of the Football Insiders.
You're truly an insider now, David. And
Thank you.
It's going to be a lot of fun this year. We're going to try to get some other people involved, reporters across the state, coaches across the state, and then Dave and I will do the driving.
Of course, kind of your midweek recap of the previous week, look ahead to the other week. And of course, we'll do it all on Varsity Sports Live, Fridays at 10:30. Us, Jody Norstead, we got you covered. But let's review this week one.
Interesting week.
Very interesting week, as it always is. But we'll start with 11 AAA in South Dakota. Easily the game of the weekend was Jefferson and Harrisburg. They came in Jefferson number 4, Harrisburg number 2. Rematch of the AAA championship last season. I think there was a lot of intrigue in this game initially because Jefferson's coming off a historic championship season, but they lose a lot of senior playmakers. Harrisburg, they've made the title game 3 years in a row. You thought, do they have enough talent to try and get back to the Dome? And this game lived up to the hype for an early season matchup.
You know, we had all these first game mistakes, some turnovers, several turnovers by Harrisburg, some pre-snap penalties, some cramping, that normal stuff that we get from this first week. But we saw potential on both teams. And I think the focus here was the two junior quarterbacks getting their chance to lead their team. Ethan Swenson for Jefferson and Sam Knuth for Harrisburg. And I think they both had their moments where they really shined. Ethan came in the game, and there were a few times, he could have checked the ball down, and he went downfield. He went past his first receiver and made good throws downfield. But then they also used him conservatively and brought Dawson Sexer in to take several direct snaps. They put Thomas Heiberger in once in a while to distract people on offense. So I really like what Jefferson did there, trying to work Ethan Swenson in the game. And then Sam Knuth for Harrisburg, he cramped up a little bit and had to come out. Max Carlson came in to take direct snaps and to play quarterback from time to time throughout the game. But you could see the potential there, too. Just a few turnovers really killed them. So Harrisburg had a lot of opportunities in this game. It wasn't for the turnovers. If they would have punched one in right at halftime when they were inside the 5-yard line and didn't get it done, this game could have been a lot different. But Jefferson found a way to take this not only to overtime, but to find a way to win in overtime. An impressive win for the Cavaliers to back up their championship.
Yeah, I know Jefferson's the only team with the actual win, but there are things, as you said, Jandy, that both teams can take away. We'll start with Harrisburg. Titan Tryon is just ridiculous. He had 3 touchdowns receiving. I think the difference, though, is Harrisburg needs probably a little more diversity on offense. They need to establish a ground game. We've seen that they can throw for it. They've always been able to establish great receivers in the past, Tryon being another one of them. Max Carlson is kind of a Swiss Army knife who can do everything. And Sam Knuth, we were not for the cramping. He did a good job. He did lead them back from 14 points down because they were down 21-7. But again, I think just a little more of the run game should help Harrisburg in the future.
Yeah, and that's something that Harrisburg has had some riches lately, right, with Gavin Ross and some other running backs. They've had some really good running backs. Levi Danielson, not to say that he doesn't have that potential, but he's not quite there yet. So if they can get him running the ball, I agree. I think Harrisburg's going to be a really good team. And then Jefferson, again, the coaching staff did a great job. Titan Tryon you mentioned, but the DBs for Jefferson did a really good job.
Evan Haug made the play of the game in overtime.
Evan Haug made a huge play in that game. Demarius Fields with an interception in that game. But it was a tough matchup because they've got small corners going against a guy like Titan Tryon who can jump, he can out-physical you, he can just go get the ball. He's going to be a tough matchup for everybody this year.
And with more on Jefferson, I just thought veteran grit, the holdover guys from the championship team are kind of being expected to take on more elevated roles. You mentioned Dawson Sexer. He was they didn't really need him on offense last season just because they had a wealth of weapons, but using him as a Wildcat QB, using him in different offensive packages. Thomas Heiberger, the future Wisconsin Badger, obviously they can use him on offense, but defensively, if he rushes the quarterback, you better have a quick clock and a quick trigger if you're the opposing QB.
He was in Sam Knuth's face all day. I thought he had 2 sacks, but it turned out he had a tackle for a loss and a sack in that game. And then he came in on offense and played. Right after he scored the offense touchdown, I went over to get a shot of him on the sidelines, and he just got done throwing up. He's
a gamer.
Exhausted playing both sides. And Sexer the same way. Sexer caught a touchdown pass in the first quarter to crack the scoreboard open. He finished the game with an overtime touchdown, and he played his heart out on defense. Jefferson was a lot of fun to watch.
It's kind of the old cliche, that heart of a champion, but getting a win on the road against one of your biggest rivals, especially coming off a season that was so historically great. Again, not to harp too much on it, but they won every game last season by at least 17 points. I mean,
Right.
that was a dominant, historically dominant South Dakota high school football team. And now the year after that, when you lose so many senior playmakers, seeing the underclassmen step up, you got to feel good if you're Jefferson. And it also puts other teams on alert that, just because Jefferson lost a lot of pieces does not mean they're not going to be a contender again.
And I think they feel, they shouldn't, but they feel slighted a little bit, being an undefeated
Probably by
team.
us. No, I'm just kidding.
Coming down in the rankings a little bit. If nothing else, they're going to use that for fuel this year, for sure. And they shouldn't have to, because there are 5, maybe 6 teams in 11 AAA that every time any one of those teams plays each other, we're going to have a fantastic matchup, and we saw that in week 1.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get to kind of the topsy-turviness of AAA in a little bit. So Jefferson-Harrisburg was the game on Friday. The game on Saturday, the Dakota Bowl, my goodness, O'Gorman and Brandon Valley, back and forth we go, and you were out at McEnany Field, and it came down to the final seconds, literally.
It was a lot of fun. It felt like Brandon Valley had control of this one early, a couple of good drives, but they missed a field goal, couldn't capitalize. Got a touchdown early from Devion Bonwell-Whitty, their super sophomore, who looked really good in this game. But O'Gorman stayed in the game, and then they found a way to make some drives of their own. There were a lot of long drives on both sides of the ball. Both teams were able to get long drives together in this one. The couple takeaways I had in this one is watching Landon Delaney, the junior receiver for Brandon Valley. He had a great game. 7 catches, 109 yards and a touchdown, some spectacular catches. On the last drive, we thought the last drive of the game, Brandon Valley needed a 4th and 13. They went to Landon Delaney and got it. They went downfield, they got it to Delaney. They went into the end zone and got it to Delaney. He was their go-to guy on that drive to take the lead, but they left just enough time on the clock for O'Gorman to come all the way back down the field, and they found Ryland Satter. And congratulations to Hayden Gross, their quarterback, who, he's not your Bennett Dannenbring. He's not the guy who's going to throw 50 times a game, but he did a good job when he had to, and he got the team down the field. Ryland Satter came up with a huge catch at the end of the game to take that lead, and you just felt that Dakota Bowl magic in the air when you see Steve Keeter sitting in the end zone and cheering the team on, and it just felt like O'Gorman had an edge in this one, the way they played in that fourth quarter. It's
funny because when we talked to Jason Poppinga before the season for our preview show, he was very explicit. He's like, Ryland Satter's going to NDSU, Henry Theobald's going to UND, but we are not a 2-person team, and we can't be a 2-person team. Just because we have 2 future FCS players on our squad doesn't mean the rest of the guys have to develop. At the same time, Satter came through when he needed to, and as you mentioned, Hayden Gross, I think that's probably the biggest revelation for O'Gorman, just because, as you said, he's a different type of quarterback than Bennett Dannenbring, but his first big test, he leads a game-winning drive. That's got to feel good.
That's huge, and he played a huge role last year on defense. This year, getting that opportunity to play offense, and if you're a quarterback in South Dakota, you want to be a quarterback for Jason Poppinga. This guy loves to design an offense that he can utilize the skills of his quarterback, and we saw it with Hayden Gross. He was able to find the plays that worked against Brandon Valley, who has a really good defense. By the way, Brandon Valley, they are really good. They're going to be a team to be reckoned with. They had a lot of guys on both sides of the ball who made a huge impact in that game. They had sophomores who made a huge impact. Nolan Pudwell, I was really impressed by. And they did a good job with Levi Veskerna, their running back, was a sophomore. He did a good job running behind that big offensive line. I think Brandon's going to get nothing but better. But, yeah, credit to O'Gorman and the way they found a way to win. And this has been their MO for years now.
Yeah, you mentioned the running back Veskerna, 112 yards and a touchdown, and then Bonwell-Whitty, again, a couple of sophomore playmakers for this Brandon Valley Lynx squad. So, again, nothing to really hang your hat on if you're Brandon Valley. These are going to be some tough AAA games as we continue on through the season. I mean, technically, we're not even in September yet.
Yeah, we're just getting started.
We're just getting started. Briefly, Sioux Falls-Lincoln over Sioux Falls-Roosevelt, 43-7. Roosevelt had a couple of key guys suspended. I think my biggest takeaway from this game is just Lincoln came into this year ranked number 1, and they took care of business against the team they should have beaten.
And they executed. We know that they have, we talk about Harrisburg's receiving room being so good with Max Carlson and Titan Tryon and Cale Morton. Well, this Lincoln receiving room is all that or better with Jack Smith and Dawson Syme and Isaac Jarofsky and all these guys who can make plays. But the running game, they rotated 3 running backs in who all had big games. So that's scary. If this team that we know Tate Schaefer and the offensive crew can get it done through the air, if they start getting it done on the ground and with the way they did on defense, like that could be the one team that maybe has that extra gear to pull away. Depth-wise, maybe not as much as some of these other teams, but like high-end talent, really good team.
Yeah, you mentioned they rotated a bunch of running backs. Draven Hodges, technically, I guess what you would call the starting running back. He honestly got a little overshadowed last year just because Jack Smith caught pretty much everything thrown his way. So if they can establish the depth of that running game like they did here in this opening week against Roosevelt, as you said, I think that may be the one separator. They obviously stayed at number one because they didn't do anything to lose it, but it's going to be very, very interesting down the stretch here. As again, all these teams just kind of get going, and we find out, what different types of offensive playmakers all these teams have.
Right, and Lincoln, last week Roosevelt, this week Rapid City Central, and then they get into that meat of the schedule where we're really going to see what the Patriots have. Speaking of Roosevelt quickly, they had a couple guys out. Their quarterback didn't play. He should be back, Jackson Brower. Jackson Gravengood came in and tried to take snaps and do what he could at quarterback, and Taden Nave did what he could, but just not enough depth to play the number one team right off the bat with several players out.
And then the early game at Howard Wood Field on Friday, Sioux Falls, Washington over Rapid City Stevens, 27-7. Last year, remember, it was the upset, quote-unquote, when Stevens beat Washington out in Rapid City. Different this time around. The Warriors have that veteran quarterback in Tommy Hoffman, and Mason Wilson is a guy who people are going to learn more and more about as the season goes along.
Yeah, Mason Wilson has been a starter since he was a freshman on the defensive side. He's doing some running this year. And Washington just said, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to run it down their throats and see if that works. And it worked, and they kept doing it. A little bit of a surprise. I think, people thought maybe Washington was down a little bit this year. They have several players who didn't come back out for football that had played the last couple of seasons. And their depth is maybe not as good, but they really like the guys they have. We didn't have time to show the highlights on Varsity Sports Live, but we caught up with the Warriors after the game, and here's Mason Wilson and their head coach Ryan Evans talking about the big win.
If we lead by example, if we keep our heads high when things get down, the younger players, they really look up to us even if we don't think they are. So we really just got to keep a level head throughout the game, whether we're high or low.
They're all in. This senior class has been through a lot, and we don't have a lot of those seniors left, and the ones that we do, they're here to stay. They bleed orange and black, and the young kids are picking up on that right away, and the leaders of our team are teaching these boys how to play.
All right, so new top 5 poll comes out. A couple shifts. Lincoln stays at number 1. Jefferson and Harrisburg flip-flop. So Jefferson is 2, Harrisburg is 4. And O'Gorman and Brandon Valley flip-flop. So O'Gorman is 3, Brandon 5. But honestly, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I can see any of those 5 winning it all this year. I mean, it really is. You're seeing so many great players for all these teams that 1 through 5, any of them could be in the Dome.
It's going to be who's healthy at the end of the year. I really, really, truly believe that. Which team has enough depth, makes enough adjustments, but all these teams have firepower. I don't know if you agree with that top 5, but I'm okay with it.
I actually, in voting for the poll, I had this exactly the way it came out. So, yeah, I just think you flip-flop Jefferson and Harrisburg and Brandon and O'Gorman just based on the victories. I mean, that's pretty much all you can do. And as I said, Lincoln didn't do anything to lose the number 1 spot, so you might as well keep them at number 1.
Yeah, and at the end of the year, we could be seeing Harrisburg and Brandon Valley, even though they're 4 and 5 and lost their first game, they could be the teams playing at the Dome. Who knows? And speaking of them, I think they play coming up this weekend.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's going to be the interesting game. So games next week. We got the Rushmore Bowl, by the way, here on Midco Sports. So we're going to have Lincoln against Rapid City Central, and then Rapid City Stevens against Douglas. That's going to be on Saturday. But the other interesting games in AAA, O'Gorman's going to be at Roosevelt, Washington at Jefferson at Howard Wood. But as you mentioned, Harrisburg, Brandon Valley, one of those teams is going to be 0-2.
Yeah, and you know what? We talked about this last year. It was the same thing as Brandon Valley didn't get off to the start that they wanted to. And, Lincoln didn't get off to the exact start that they wanted to. They played well. But all these teams, they don't need to worry too much if they go 0-2. But you're right. The optics are bad, right? You don't want to start the season out like that. But this is going to be a whale of a ball game. These are the 2 largest, and when I say largest teams, have the most players out for football in the state of South Dakota in Harrisburg and Brandon Valley. So they have the depth, they've got the talent, they've got the big lines, they've got a couple quarterbacks taking over this year in Jack Dewey and Sam Knuth who look comfortable in their roles. They've got tons of playmakers around them. This is the game of the week.
Harrisburg and Brandon Valley on Saturday. So that's a look at AAA. Let's move on down to 11 AA.
Do it.
Number 1, Pierre. They looked absolutely fine. 32-0, a shutout victory on the road at Aberdeen Central. 5 total touchdowns for new quarterback Cade Kaiser.
Yeah, this guy looked like Lincoln Kienholz back there because he was able to tuck and run anytime he wanted to. He took a lot of safety throws to Jet Zabel, who I think had 10 catches on the day.
10 for 140, yep.
10 for 140 and a couple of touchdowns. Cooper Terwilliger, their freshman tight end, came out and made a nice touchdown catch. They had a lot longer drives than I'm used to seeing out of them over the last couple of years with Kienholz, but they were very, very efficient drives. So it took them a while to get the dominant win, longer than it has in the last couple of years, but the final score looked the same in the end, and they were really impressive.
Absolutely. You mentioned Jet Zabel, and I just thought that the defense obviously did well. They intercepted an Aberdeen Central pass in the end zone, returned it for a bunch of yards, then got a quick offensive touchdown right after that. And again, there's a reason why they've won 6 straight 11 AA championships. It's not the rebuild, it's the reload. And yes, Cade Kaiser may not necessarily be Lincoln Kienholz. You're not going to see 75, 80-yard touchdowns every single week. But if they can put together efficient drives, maybe it gives the defense a chance to rest a little bit. Maybe overall it balances the team a little bit more. Again, this is nothing against Lincoln Kienholz, but when you're scoring like on 30-second drives, the defense doesn't get much of a chance to rest.
That's a good point, Dave. That's interesting to see how that will evolve throughout the year. I think the rest of AA maybe a half step back from where they were last year. Maybe not Yankton. We'll see. We'll talk more about the rest of the AA. But Pierre is pretty much right where they were as far as the depth of talent. They might have more all-staters on their team this year than any year that I remember. But let's talk more about the Pierre Governors and what they've meant to, getting close to football history. We're going to bring on the Austin Nicholson from the Pierre Capital Journal to talk a little bit more about this Pierre Governor team and how special they are historically. Austin Nicholson joins us on Football Insiders to talk a little Pierre football. And, you've been around this Pierre Governor program for a while. Does it surprise you how much success they've been able to put together year after year?
Yeah, I when I first got here, I come from the South. I wasn't sure what to expect football-wise here in South Dakota. And from the very first game I saw Pierre play last year, I was like, wow, this team is really good, and they were really connected as a team. And just seeing how they went perfect last year, 12-0, sixth straight state title, tying West Central for the most in state history. It's a pretty rare feat, obviously, and it's just pretty crazy how they've done it.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about what they've got back and what they lost and what you expect from the team this year.
Yeah, so they lost nearly 20 seniors from last year's team, including Ohio State quarterback Lincoln Kienholz. He was arguably the best quarterback in South Dakota history past 3 years. They lost him, then they lost receivers like Jack Merkwan, who was program leader in multiple categories. They also lost Jason Majajak. He's at Nebraska now playing for the Cornhuskers. And then they lost a lot of key defenders on that side of the ball as well, like Gavin Stotts and Jaden Wiebe. They were all first team All-State. So they lost a lot of key production from last year, but they also return a lot. And the main key returner, I believe, is Cade Kaiser, who played last year as a wide receiver, who was first team All-State athlete. And now he's going to be he has already played a game of quarterback and will be the starting quarterback this year for the rest of the year. So I'm excited to see what he does.
Well, they started the season out in good fashion, playing a ranked team in Aberdeen on the road. Weren't exactly sure what to expect, but they got it done. Tell us a little bit about how they got it done.
Yeah, I think they got it done because I think honestly just Pierre's a little bit much for Aberdeen just because they have the better, I think, roster and just talent. But also because Steve Still is just one of the best at coming up with offensive plays. No matter who's on the other side of that ball, they're still going to be able to. Pierre's still going to be able to move the ball and score points. So, and I think they also defense. They showed that. I was talking to Steele about this during this first practice that they call the county fair. He said their defenses, they're really, really excited about it this year. And they said that, they're really excited about their linebackers and Trey Lewis and Chance Sarda. And then also at DB, they have Spencer Schonsberg and then Spencer Easlin. They're both committed to play D2 football. So they said that their DBs could be some of the best they've had in a while. So they're really, really excited about their defense. And I think the first game was really just about figuring out things on the offensive side of the ball more than anything. And I think Cade Kaiser showed that he's a dual threat quarterback, having 200 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and then also running for almost 200 yards and then 2 more touchdowns. And then obviously Jet Zabel going to NDSU, he had 10 receptions for 140 yards. So I think that's just Pierre's just overall the better team that night.
Thanks to Austin, and good luck on your next venture. He's only going to be in Pierre for a couple more weeks. That's why we want to make sure we had him on this week before he goes. Great job by Austin. But the rest of 11AA, there are a lot of storylines there too.
The biggest one being the number 2 team, T. They survive, and that's not putting it lightly. They survived against Huron 27-26. This is a game the Titans led by 20. This is a game where Huron scored, I believe, the last 19 points of regulation. It was 27-7. Huron scores. They got a touchdown with 13 seconds left. Credit to them. They go for 2 in the win. They don't get it. Huron not ranked in the top 5 coming in, but if they had pulled that off, that would have been, statistically a massive upset, and only for the reason that for the last couple of years it has been Pierre and T. It's kind of been like who's going to get the better of whom. Pierre had always gotten the better of T area, but the Titans were kind of nipping on their heels. So to see T not necessarily struggle, but have a game against Huron early in the season, I don't know if it's necessarily cause for concern, but it's certainly a wake-up call.
Yeah, I think the script flipped a little bit in the second half when Huron decided to go to the air, and they aired it out. And I tell you what, their receivers played a heck of a game. Gavin Moding, 8 catches, 158 and a touchdown, and then CJ Gainey, 5 catches, 126 and 2 scores in the game. But when they did that, they kind of negated the pass rush from T. T had a good pass rush all game, but they didn't get a sack. And that's when I talked to Drew Strand, head coach of Huron. He said that was key. We bent, but we didn't break on that offensive line. We've got a lot of senior-led offensive line experience up front, and they did their job enough against maybe the best defensive line in the state. So a lot of positives for Huron coming out of this one.
And, of course, off of that, Colton McNeil, the quarterback, over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns for the Tigers. And it's interesting because we know T is this great running team. They would run every play if they wanted to, but a high-powered passing attack, if they can score quickly and maybe negate some of those longer drives that T is bound to take just because they run the ball so frequently, I don't know if that's necessarily a formula, but it's certainly interesting how a passing attack is what worked against the Titans.
Yeah, it is. And trust me, these other teams are going to take note, and T will make some adjustments as well in their defensive backfield. They've got some studs back there, and Ethan Viss and some of those guys. But yeah, this is not the same T area team. They don't have as many seniors as they've had in the past 2 seasons. So maybe a little window opening there for somebody else to step up in 11AA.
Well, let's take a look at some of those other teams that might indeed step up in 11AA. You were on Watertown from the beginning. They had a dominant victory, 33-0 over Brookings. Juven Hudson was excellent, returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown. And Juven Hudson, one of those players that just because Watertown didn't necessarily do as well as a team last year, maybe a little bit overlooked, but he is an absolute stud.
And he missed a game or two, so his season totals didn't look as good. But as much as we talk about Juven Hudson, who went for 98 yards, the kick return touchdown, the offensive line is really the key for Watertown, and maybe one of the best offensive lines in this class in the state, and they're going to enjoy that because for as good as Juven Hudson is, he's not a pounder. He's not a guy who can get hit 20 times a game and keep on trucking. So they're going to have to keep him healthy all year long, and that offensive line is built to do that. So this Watertown team, they get A+ for the first week in the way they played against Brookings.
And speaking of shutout victories, Yankton, a dominant game against Mitchell, 42-0. The Bucks coming in number 3, kind of a solid number 3 behind Pierre and T, and certainly acquitted themselves as a good team right now.
Yeah, Shaler Platt ran the ball well. They're very athletic on the outside. I think this Yankton team, they're missing some names from last year, but they feel like they have the talent, and they maybe are really close to being that number 2 team in the state as well, along with Watertown and T right now.
Some other interesting notes, interesting results. Spearfish beat St. Thomas More 51-27.
How about that? The West River love for 11AA.
Yeah.
When's the last time we saw Spearfish,
Sturgis,
and Douglas start out the season 1-0 in 11AA? But they did exactly that. Spearfish, no problem with St. Thomas More. They've got a couple tougher games coming up here soon. That'll be interesting to see. Sturgis with their new quarterback, Aiden Hederman, the track star Star, who had been playing receiver for the last few years, came in, ran over 100, threw for over 100. I think he's going to be a difference maker for the Scoopers this year. And then Douglas, a team that had gone, early in 2020 is the last time
it's been a while.
They won a game. They got a win over Belle Fourche. Yeah, I know it's a class below, but that's a huge, huge move in the right direction for head coach Will Velez and the rest of the Douglas Patriots. So they're looking forward to coming up this week against Stevens in the Rushmore Bowl. That'll be a lot of fun to see how they do.
11 AA poll, no surprise, Pierre, T, and Yankton stay 1, 2, 3. Watertown moves into that 4 spot, Spearfish number 5.
Yeah, and Spearfish, and I had Huron in the top 5. I just think it was an impressive way to start the season against a team like T, who had made the Dome a couple of years in a row. But no arguments with Spearfish. They played a great game as well, but they played against, an 11A school. I always forget where St. Thomas More is, 11A or 11B. But
too many 11-man classes. I'm just putting that out there.
They were solid in their opener as well, so no beef with Spearfish.
Games this week, Aberdeen Central against T. We'll see if Aberdeen Central can bounce back. We'll see how T feels at home. Brookings at Pierre, Spearfish at Yankton, and then probably the game in terms of intrigue, 2 upstarts, Watertown and Huron. Obviously, Watertown getting the win last week, Huron almost knocking off T. It'll be interesting to see how those two match up.
Yeah, this will be a lot of fun just to see, this is what we always do in the first couple weeks of the season, is just gauge how these teams are, and, was that first week the fault of one team or because one team was doing so well? Well, we're going to find that out this week when those two teams play, who both had impressive openers.
Moving on down to 11A, Del Rapids jumped out to a 30-7 lead at halftime, 44-13 final. Mason Stubbe rushing for more than 200 yards. Jack Henry didn't really have to do much under center, but kind of what you expected from Del Rapids out of the gate.
And I thought Madison, with 9 starters back, would be improved, and I think they are improved. Just a tough task coming out against Del Rapids in the opener. And you're right, Jack Henry, the future SDSU quarterback, didn't have to do a lot. And this has been the case for him since he's been quarterback. He hasn't had to throw the ball. Everybody around the state wants to know, can he throw it? Yeah, he can throw it. But when you have Mason Stubbe running for 200 yards and you got a Rusink running it for over 100 yards, no need to pass.
Yeah, Mason Stubbe, I mentioned, rushing for more than 200 yards. Had a touchdown on the very first offensive play of the season, just to give you an idea how things were going for the Warriors.
Already.
Absolutely. Probably the most intriguing game in 11A, the most intriguing result, that is, Canton over Sioux Falls Christian 30-16, and it was the Seahawks and their own running game that impressed you.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, they've got some athletes back here. Kane Wallner, for those who don't know, this is probably our next D1 guy that we're looking at, just a junior, but all the D1 schools are all over him. And he's played receiver in the past. He moved into running back this year. He is strong, and he is really good. And then you pair him up with Kanan McCracken, who brings a little different type of load.
Was a great running back name, by the way.
A great running back name, and he had a great commentary. If you didn't watch Varsity Sports Live,
the old chip on the shoulder.
He was in full beast mode, and he's out for the Argus later. But other than that, I would just take a look at this Kane Wallner kid. This is somebody you're going to want to watch if you have a chance to watch this year. And Sioux Falls Christian, a little bit back on their heels to start things. A brand new quarterback, a brand new offensive line. You could tell they're still putting some things together, but they're going to be there. They got the talent on the outside to get this thing done this year. They played really well against Canton.
And then a quick shout out to Chamberlain quarterback Cruz Solik. What a great game, even in a loss against Lennox.
Yeah, this kid went through a devastating knee injury. It's been 673 days.
Almost 2 full years.
Almost 2 full years since he's been able to throw. Now he's a senior. And he came out and he looked really good. 10 of 18, 397 yards through the air, 4 touchdown passes. He did have a couple picks as they tried to make a comeback against Lennox and couldn't quite come up with it. But a school record at Chamberlain, looking for big things from him and the Cubs this season.
11A top 5, no surprise. Del Rapids stays at number 1. West Central, they got a win over Custer. Canton at 3, they move up. Dakota Valley at 4, and then Sioux Falls Christian falls to 5.
I've been putting Lennox in my top 5 the last, since we started, a week ago. Mm-hmm. But they really balled out against Chamberlain. Boston Katzer threw over 50 passes, over 300 yards. And found his main man, Porter Enan, the future D1 basketball player
For USD,
who just shows up on the football field and goes for double-digit catches and over 100 yards and a couple touchdowns. So this Lennox team is definitely one to watch.
And they will be at Vermillion, ironically enough, next week. West Central at Sioux Falls Christian. That's a top 5 showdown. Canton Beersford, good road test for the Seahawks. And then Belle Fourche at Del Rapids. I think that West Central Sioux Falls Christian probably the game to highlight in this class.
I don't know if you remember last year, but that one went down to the end. There were several scores on both sides of the ball. West Central will get their first big test coming off of their win against Custer. And I'll tell you what, Sioux Falls Christian doesn't want to have the same kind of start they had last year where they got behind the 8 ball and then had to work their way back into the playoff picture. They'd like to get a big win.
11B, not a whole lot to talk about just because everyone who was expected to win did win. But I think probably the big story if you're a Winter Warrior fan, it kind of was quote-unquote back to normal, 46-6 over Wagner after their 8-0 triple OT slugfest against Tri-Valley in week 0. Just good to see the Warriors, again, if you're a Warrior fan, if you're a Warrior player coach, just to see them look like the winner of old.
Right, and Wagner's a good opponent for them, so for them to get a win against them like that, it's great. Carson Keyser came in, did a nice job in the backfield. They always rotate 4 or 5 different running backs, not just the Aiden Barfus show this year. They do have some more talent back there. So, yeah, watch out for Winter. That's still one to watch, though, to see if anybody else can threaten them, because I think those teams right behind them are close. And Bridgewater Emory-Eaton, a team that had a down year last year, they look like they're back pretty full and focused this year to maybe make a run at that title spot. Yeah,
Bridgewater, Emory-Eaton, Cruz, Sioux Valley, Elk Point, Jefferson, Hot Springs, none of them were really tested last week. And so the top 5 stays the same. Winter at number 1, EPJ at 2, Sioux Valley at 3, Bridgewater at 4, Hot Springs at 5.
Yeah, and no issues there. I think Dual is a team that I've had in my top 5, and they had a nice win over Aberdeen Roncalli, who some people had voted for the week prior. So I think Dual's definitely a team to watch, but no beef with any of those top 5.
Elk Point, Jefferson, Sioux Valley is a 2-3 matchup this week. That'll be very intriguing. And then Rapid City Christian and St. Thomas More. Again, St. Thomas More losing the Spearfish. So Rapid City Christian is a team you've kind of talked about on the radio out in Rapid City, that a team that could surprise some people this year.
Yeah, this is a team that started a lot of sophomores last year. These guys are juniors, even some more sophomores this year, but a program that keeps taking steps up. And I think they're ready to maybe overtake St. Thomas More. St. Thomas More has been the staple for the small 11-man schools, over the last decade or two. And now Rapid City Christian maybe looks like that team that could be the new St. Thomas More out there. And this will be a huge proving ground right here to see if the Comets, belong in that ranking conversation.
Shout out head coach Matt McIntosh, my wife's cousin-in-law. Just had to put that
really
out
cool.
there.
That's
exactly.
Really cool.
So
he's done a great job.
Shout out to Matt McIntosh and Rapid City Christian. All right, 9-man. Oh, there's a lot to talk about in 9-man. Yeah. Starting with the fact that the 9AA number 1 team lost, the 9A number 1 team lost, and the 9B number team lost. All the number 1s in 9-man coming into last week, all lost this weekend.
And I don't know, does that show that we don't know who the number 1 team should be? Or
no, it just shows that 9-man's a crapshoot.
It is a crapshoot. And, honestly, last year, Howard went through the season undefeated before they lost in the playoffs on their way to try to repeat as champions. But they had a lot of close calls. And one of those close calls was an overtime game against Canastota last year. So for them to lose to Canastota this year, not a huge shock. But what did surprise me a little bit is Canastota got a win over the number 1 team in 9AA, and they're not getting as much love as some of these other teams like Warner and Wolsey Wessington and whatnot. So I think Canastota maybe has a little chip on their shoulder right now.
I was going to say, we're going to get to the polls here at the very end, but I, like you, have a beef with where Canastota was placed. But, so even though Howard just moved up to 9AA a couple years ago, it's still technically kind of an upset. Canastota, a 9A team over Howard, 30-18. And then Gregory, this one, not necessarily a surprise. I don't even necessarily think it's an upset. They lost to the number 3 team, Wolsey Wessington. It was a back-and-forth affair, 48-32. But when we heard from Wolsey Wessington in the postgame during Varsity Sports Live on Friday, they put it bluntly. To be the best, you've got to beat the best, and they beat last year's 9A champs.
And this Gregory team has a lot of confidence coming back with some of their stars this year. They're overall a much younger team than they were last year. But Wolsey Wessington, the level of play from Moshe Richmond and Caleb Richmond is evident over what they did last year. And those guys are stars, and those guys are ready to take on any comers in 9A this season. Woolsey Wessington's going to be a problem for people in that class.
48-32 over Gregory. And then 9B, and to be completely fair to Hitchcock-Tulare, when you and I talked to coaches across the state, we said crapshoot. 9B is the crapshoot of crapshoots. Yeah. There was no consensus on how 9B was going to go. So Hitchcock-Tulare, the defending champs, they start at number 1. So they get shut out 40-0 by Faulkton area. And you see the score, it kind of, catches your eye a little bit, but I think it just goes to the nature of how 9B, no one's going to really know anything until late in the season.
And for the moment, at least, it puts Faulkton up there.
Oh, yeah, I vaulted them to number 1.
Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
I mean, Garrett Kramer had a great day running the football for them, only needed 11 carries to get almost 200 yards on the ground. The defense, it was a great team effort. They were able to contain Hitchcock-Tulare's running attack, which was a huge part of their win in that game. So, yeah, I think Faulkton area deserves to be that number 1 team. But after that, DeSmet went out to Stanley County, and Stanley County was without arguably their best player, and Colton Brady, who was out for the next month or so, and the Stanley County still got the win. And we're not talking about Stanley County at all. This is a 9AA team that maybe deserves a little more recognition for what they're doing. So DeSmet lost. Avon got the win, but we're not sure. They haven't gotten a huge quality win yet. Hitchcock-Tulare lost. Del St. Mary had a tough game against Hamlin, so they lost. I mean, I don't know who else to include in the conversation. Harriet-Selby area gets a win against a team out west.
I put them in my top 5, but they didn't make the consensus.
They got a good win, and I think they ran the ball well, but they're not blowing people away. Potter County, I think a couple years ago, made a run to the title game. Maybe they have some players back as they start off 2-0. But 9B is it's crazy wide open.
All right, so going through the new number 1. So 9AA, it's Parkston. They defeated Platte Geddes 46-0. I had Hamlin number 1.
I did too.
In my choice. They end up being number 2. Howard moves down to 3. Elkton Lake Benton 4. And then Wall. We didn't discuss Wall. Last year's defending state champs, number 2 coming in. They lose to Phillip 22-12. Wall ends up at number 5 in this week's 9AA poll.
And this shows you the quality of team that Phillip is. That was Wall's toughest game last year, was against Phillip on their way to an undefeated season. This year, Phillip got the better of them with almost everybody back. 8 starters back. Turkleton did a great job running the football. This is a team to watch in 9A that could be one of those sneaky teams that doesn't have a hugely tough schedule the rest of the way. They can get a really high seed going into the 9A playoffs.
And speaking of 9A, this is the poll I wanted to discuss. So Woolsey Wessington number 1. I don't have an issue with that. They beat Gregory. Gregory was the previous number 1 defending state champs. So the overall consensus poll, they have Warner at 2, Canastota at 3, Gregory at 4, Harding County Bison at 5. I struggled back and forth. I wanted to put Canastota 2, but I also think Warner didn't really do anything to lose it. But in the end, I did put Warner 2, Canastota 3, but I wanted to put Canastota number 2. I wanted to, but I'm just like, I can't really justify it.
I'm the same as you. I wanted to honor Canastota for beating. Everybody's talking about 9AA as
they beat the number 1 team a class above them.
The class, usually there's not a huge difference, but this year was like, 9AA has all the good teams. And they beat the number 1 team in that class. I wanted to honor them, but who do you knock out?
Yeah.
And I did the same thing. I went Woolsey Wessington and kept Warner at 2.
Yep, and then Gregory at 4, no problem with that. I had Phillip at number 5 instead of Harding County Bison. I thought they deserved to be up by beating Wall.
I had the exact same thing, and I don't know if we've been hanging out too much, Dave, but
well, we don't hang out enough. We need to hang out more, Jandy.
We do need to hang out more, but this Phillip team is the real deal, and I love to give them a little pub if I can because that was a good win against Wall.
Yep. So that's the 9A poll. 9B, as we mentioned, Faulkton, they vault from number 4 to number 1. No problem there. I had them at number 1. DeSmet number 2. Avon 3. Hitchcock-Tulare falls to 4. Del Rapids, St. Mary's at 5. But as you said, the bottom part you could probably put any number of a handful of teams.
Exactly. And the season will bear out. I still think DeSmet. That's a quality loss, a back and forth game, game they had some opportunities against a good 9AA team. I think we're going to see DeSmet rise to the top, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Faulkton keep winning ways, but they've got some tough games ahead on their schedule as well.
Yep, Potter County is at Faulkton area. That's going to be a good one. You mentioned Potter County possibly could be an upstart. Del Rapids St. Mary's at DeSmet. That'll also be a good one. That's a top 5 matchup. Bonham's at Elkton Lake Benton. Avon's at Freeman. Parkston and Woolsey Weston. That's going to be a tremendous matchup.
Number one versus number one
Yep.
early in the season. You got to love that. And this Parkston team is just, they're waiting to make their mark because, they made it all the way to the Dome last year. They feel like they've got a lot of guys back with Braden Jervik back in the backfield. They are a team with Will Chidozie and some big guys up front. They've got all the pieces ready to go. But this Woolsey-Wessington team is a different animal. This will be a great matchup.
Absolutely. And as we said, 9-man, boy, we're just getting started. We're going to see so many different teams in those number one spots, so many different teams in these top fives. But it's all about how you play at the end of the season, and we're just getting started.
Just getting started. Stay with us all year.
Absolutely. Football Insiders, thank you for joining us. I'm David. That's Jandy. Varsity Sports Live Friday at 10:30 on Midco Sports, streaming on Midco Sports Plus. We will see you then.